right. I think we'll, is everybody in from the Zoom, to the Zoom room? We got people in the Zoom?
Yes,
Great,
we do.
great. So we can get started.
One.
So some of you may not know me, especially if you're at the School of Education, but I'm Ellen McKenzie. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Health, where Ebony lives half-time public health, half-time School of Education. But welcome everybody here in the room, as well as those online. And now I can't see him, but I was told that Chris Morfu is going to be joining us. I hope he's online, but special welcome to him. Chris is the Dean of the School of Education and a dear colleague, so it's nice to welcome him. So as you all know, this series is a chance to hear from our newly appointed and promoted professors, as well as our senior scientists. And today I'm thrilled that we get to hear from Dr. Ebony McGee. Ebony is a Bloomberg Distinguished Professor who is focused on innovation and inclusion in the STEM ecosystem. She has dual appointments, as I mentioned, in the School of Education and here in the School of Public Health in our own Department of Mental Health. Her work examines structural racism and how to promote success for minoritized students. At the Bloomberg School, we're fond of saying that the problems we face are complex, and they require complex solutions that can cut across disciplines and boundaries. Well, Ebony truly embodies that idea, bringing together a variety of approaches and perspectives, from equity ethics to Afrofuturism, as she helps us to imagine a more inclusive future for STEM. Ebony comes to this work with a deeply lived experience. An engineer by training, she earned her master's degree and landed a successful job in New York City, but she found that she was quite miserable. Every day she was encountering racism, whether subtle or blatant. Ebony didn't yet have the language back then to fully describe what she was going through, but she wanted to discover if others shared her experience. She went back to school to pursue her PhD in education and began examining how STEM culture affects high-achieving Black and brown people. Ever since, she has been breaking new ground. Through her research, her scholarship, and writing, Ebony is helping us to understand the mental health consequences experienced by minoritized students and professionals in the STEM fields. Over the course of this work, she has received some 13 awards from the National Science Foundation. She has published in both peer-reviewed journals, popular media, and is the author of a book, Black, Brown, Bruised, a book based on hundreds of interviews with high-achieving, underrepresented STEM students and faculty of color. Ebony has also pioneered multiple initiatives in pursuit of her goals, including founding Our Rights, an organization committed to research, advocacy, and policy work that helps dismantle systemic racism and barriers in STEM. And I'm sure she'll be talking a little bit more about Our Rights. Ebony has been a terrific addition to our school here in public health, to the School of Education, and indeed to the university. And I know her colleagues in mental health appreciate her collaborative spirit and her full commitment to mentoring the next generation of scientists. We are grateful to benefit from Ebony's perspective and expertise as we look to shape the future of our school and our field. Ultimately, we want to make the Bloomberg School the best possible place for everyone to learn and work, and we want to nurture greater wellness and resiliency for all those working in STEM fields. And of course, the changes that we make within will ripple, we hope, throughout the world. As Ebony writes in the opening of her book, quote, STEM fields have influenced nearly every aspect of human life, so the ability to cultivate talent in the STEM arena links directly to our everyday lives. And we all know the truth of that statement. If we foster a more equitable and inclusive STEM environment, we will be opening the doors for greater innovation and new discoveries and building a better future for us all. Professor McGee, thank you for all you do to help us understand and nurture resiliency and well-being in our communities. I know this work is not easy, especially given the time we are in. We are grateful for all you give our school, our university, and of course the field. And we are so excited to hear from you today. Ebony?
Thank you, Dean Ellen. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I also want to thank the folks from the School of Public Health, the School of Education, my R-Right team members, and anyone who was responsible for making this happen. Okay, because I have 66 slides, I'm going to get started right away. And thank you, Ellen, for forecasting some of the slides that I'm going to present. So, as the dean stated, I am I'm an engineer, but she may not know I'm actually a recovering engineer. I feel like if there was a 12-step program for engineers who've faced racial battle fatigue or sexual battle fatigue or just battle fatigue in general, I would certainly be in that club. I was often told to sort of take a colorblind or race neutral approach to leave my blackness at the door. Now, how does someone like me do something like that? Or maybe to leave my gender at the door. And then when I had my son and I was a quote unquote single parent, don't tell anybody about that. So, in terms of reifying certain stereotypes that they had about me, my education, the fact that I had coveted internships, a really good GPA, didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything. I had to continue to prove myself over and over again. So when I got laid off, and I'm just being really transparent about that because the CV looks like this, but my life is actually like this, ups and downs, ebbs and flows. I decided to reinvent myself and to study people like me. So folks who were high achieving, who made really good grades in their STEM courses, but were still sort of troubled by their experiences. And it took me along the path to understand the culture of STEM. So, the culture of STEM, okay, let me just say it. STEMers have a superiority complex. They really, really do. And it's often one that is manufactured by the way in which we view STEM. And we're often told, Black and brown folks are often told, if you go into STEM, you'll make really good money. And that may be true, but you'll probably make $30,000 less than your counterpart. So it's certainly not a equal playing field in that sense. And the whole messaging that we're seeing today, tomorrow, and yesterday is all about warfare, global domination, hating China and Russia, being the super duper power, which really doesn't resonate with Black and brown folks who don't want to build more bombs. They want better communities. So that took me to, I was going to be in my happy place, that I was just going to focus on success. I was going to focus on minoritized success. So what does it mean to be Black, brown? And I do include Asians because you can be overrepresented, and this is not in all STEM fields, but in some STEM fields, but still face vicious forms of marginalization. And I wanted to study career trajectories. I was really interested in why folks would spend so much time getting a PhD just for 5 years, not to do STEM, not to even want to do STEM ever again in life. And it was often about the race and racism they experienced. And then it got to sort of coping mechanisms. How do they cope? I never thought that the students, the faculty, the entrepreneurs, the employees that I studied would have mental and physical health challenges. This was very new to me, even though my own experience should have told me that it was coming. And when I found that during the interview, the folks walked in cocky, confident, just stellar, like popping their shoulders. And then you get to the middle of the interview and you say, tell me about a time you've been treated unfairly, or tell me about an incident that really bothered you. They literally break down in the interview to the point that I had to stop the interview and sometimes walk the participant over to the counseling center because I was in fear of what their emotional state, the reaction may be later on. And for a whole year, I sort of kind of ignored it to just think it was an anomaly. And I kept hearing it over and over again. And then I could not ignore it anymore. This is everything I could put on the page without absolutely annoying you. This isn't even everything. But this is enough to show that the people that we put on the front of the university cover, that we have meeting the president, the folks that we uplift as you should be like this person, are not well. The high achievers are not well. And it doesn't appear that we're talking about it in the ways that we need to. I really focus a lot on imposter syndrome because oftentimes we have these things that focus on fixing the participant while the system stays the same, right? And I notice a lot of the workshops that we even have, at Johns Hopkins are focused on fixing the student or the participant as if the problem lied with them, while the larger structure that sort of allows these things to manifest is untouched, right? But I also want to share a story of agency. It's not just simply that, the pipeline analogy where we have these little tiny leaks in the pipes. Well, if 60% of water was leaking in your pipe, we certainly wouldn't call that a leak, right? The pipes are busted. And if the contractor came to your house and saw 60% of the water pouring out on the floor, they would say, we need to replace the pipes. There's nothing wrong with the water, but we tend to do the opposite. We blame the water and we assume that the pipes are functioning as is. So, in opposition to that, there are ways in which students, faculty, entrepreneurs of color are sort of coping with their oppression, coping with their experiences. And one of the ways is very promising in terms of mental health. What we found, first of all, you have to ask certain things in surveys to get at the kind of information that you want. And we wanted to know, we saw the murder of George Floyd, we saw the influx of Black in AI, Black in STEM organizations. We wanted to know to what extent does racial activism intersect with one's ability or desire to continue to do STEM. We have a huge retention problem, right? And what we found, quite amazingly, is that racial activism actually mediates lower levels of mental health. So if you feel as though you have equity action as a part of equity ethics is sort of the thought process to get to the action. So you have the thought process that you want to do STEM for social good, and then you have the action that you actually pursue it. It actually helps us stabilize the mental health of those who are minoritized in STEM if they can do it. There's often a mismatch between what the employer wants to do and what the employee wants to do and what the employer mandates the employee to do. So we are pursuing activities with companies, really high-tech companies, I can't name them, about infusing equity ethics into sort of the work life of their employees for retention purposes and for better mental health. But I am sad to report when I ask students what they do to sort of manage these stereotypes, the two things they mention over and over again is resilience and grit. And I'm not talking about collective forms of resilience or resistance resilience, which is actually a positive thing. I'm talking about this sort of individualized forms of resilience where you're just supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, whether you have boots or not. So I understand a little bit more about resilience, and resilience is really has a bad history when it comes to Black folks. So there was this definition that people in the mental health field use historically called super coping. And it suggests that Black people are so efficient at coping that their mental health is not impacted. So they talk about leaning on family, religion, racial identity to act as buffers. So they are the buffers for the structure, right? And then we have this, so Black people are accustomed to onslaughts on their physical well-being, but they're too unsophisticated to be depressed. This is all part of the history of resilience. There's also a term, of course, I'm blanking on it now because I need to know it, that situates Black women as part of this sort of resilient narrative. And I'm going to talk about the angry Black woman stereotype. what I'm trying to say is I know a little bit more about resilience, and I think it's harmful. And I'm seeing in the anti-DI movement that people are shifting towards resilience. Like that is the go-to. I don't know if they say Chat GPT, find me another word for DEI, and resilience pops up, but it's like the wave. But resilience is supposed to be about your risks in life and your resources. Your resources are not supposed to be internal. You're supposed to have unique protective factors to protect you against oppression. When that doesn't happen and there's an imbalance, that means your stress is chronically activated. And once your stress is chronically activated for a long period of time, it actually changes the way your brain functions, which changes your physiology. And then you can pass that physiology to your unborn. So without dismantling the structures that celebrate unending levels of individualized resilience, what we're actually celebrating is Black and brown high achievers' obligation to work themselves to death. And I'm not saying that to be dynamic or for shock value. What I'm saying is doctors, lawyers, engineers, folks in public health, Black and brown, are dying 6 to 7 years earlier than their white counterparts, right? So we don't want resilience to be a slow death sentence to the folks that we're trying to be successful. So I think we need a more holistic definition of what success is. And just to be clear, the definition that I use to describe racism, which is tied to this oppression, is a definition by Ruth Gilmore that states racism specifically is a state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group differentiated vulnerability to premature death. It ends in premature death. It's a slow death, but it's a death nonetheless. And I'm here to argue that it's not just mental health that I found, unfortunately, in my participants, it is physical health too. Now, I was in my 20s just a short few months ago. Nobody's laughing, okay. And I never experienced a friend or colleague who was 27 or younger who had a stroke. This would be unheard of. This would be a crisis in my generation. But today it seems less of a crisis. And I'm trying to understand why. I don't have it on here, but I actually met a 25-year-old who had a heart attack. Something is wrong with a 3.9 GPA. Something is wrong, something is happening here. And study after study has proved that there is a definite link between racism and things like dementia. I mean, you have the fact that deaths among Black Americans related to mental health have tripled over the past decade. So something certainly is happening, and we can tie at least some of the things that are happening to the oppression that many Black and brown folks endure. So I'm starting off plainly saying that, well, not just me saying, Stephanie Dinkins also said it as well, and she talks about Afro-nowism, and I usually, ride on Afrofuturism, but she said the future is too long, that we need to actually start now if we want to really start making change. Oppression is normalized. It's been normalized in our society, and at stake are not just like our human dignity, our humanity, but like the survival of the planet, that whole thing. And in this moment, we're seeing how wealth can create greed. I mean, I know there's a lot of more sophisticated words like fascism, authoritarianism, but I got this one from the Urban Dictionary because I also speak in Ebonics proudly. And it really shows how our society is sort of failing on the promise of, meritocracy, on the promise of hard work, leads to success, because it is imbued with these systems that deny that deny the opportunity for us to do that. And I also want to talk about legally how we're seeing different legal maneuvers. Like, it is a fascinating thing to watch the legal system today to see how many people are evading justice and what they look like. I also want to talk about pop culture. Do you know there are more reality TV shows this year than actual like regular TV shows? That we have moved and shifted toward this sort of cult of personality, the rise of, demigods almost, the manipulation of media and spectacle, and the adornment of accoutrements, that bodies who have to be sort of altered to be considered beautiful, personal success, the illusionment of, having nice things when it's really just like a permanent lie that's going through the entire reality TV show, and how we embrace that culture. And then now we feel that we're not well until we look like or act like someone on reality TV. And I'm just really troubled by the influence and the manipulation that that's creating, particularly with our young people. So I give that backdrop to really talk about three of about 100 things that are wrong with wellness, the way wellness is being propagated today. And that first one is the wellness culture is overwhelmingly white, the lack of spirituality, particularly indigenous spirituality, and the capitalistic control of mental health. So first I'll start with the culture is white. So I want to first remind you that the term Karen came from people trying to enjoy and participate in outdoor activities, right? Biking, cooking outside, bird watching, selling lemonade, hiking, jogging, sitting on a bench were all sort of acts that were criminalized because the bodies were Black. So you can't tell me with the number of incidents that happen where people are just trying to be healthy and stay healthy and being criminalized for that, that the culture of wellness is somehow non-white. But let me give you a definition of culture. So a simple definition is our behaviors, culture are behaviors that we learn through participating in a community that help us navigate our relationships with ourselves, each other, and the world around us. But white culture, we live on a hierarchical cultural plane where white culture is at the top and cultures that assimilate towards whiteness are next. And Black culture plays a unique place in entertainment value, way at the top, and intellectual value, kind of at the bottom, right? So it's almost like a form of tokenism where we're valued for our entertainment purposes, and I consider like basketball a form of entertainment, and less valued for our intellectual purposes. So this is sort of the world of wellness that we live in. And then we have this sort of fragmented reality that I think is supposed to be modern. It's supposed to be, new. The split of the body and mind, the inner and the outer, the split between individual and society, man versus nature, such fragmentation, not seeing us in our holistic, full selves can create great damage to oneself, and we have seen it create great damage to our society and to nature. There's also this thing where institutions and organizations from more economically developed, always almost Western countries intervene in the mental health systems of those less economically developed, often Black and brown, with the intentions of saving them, fixing them, right? Often making them look more like white culture. In this sort of assumption of superiority is just a lack of respect for the indigenous and the local knowledge, practices, and cultural context. And we have seen this reverberate throughout the mental health field. I think a couple of examples are necessary. I got permission to share this. I had a cousin who was raped, and her mental health counselor told her that she came from a rape culture, so she cannot blame herself. So when Black and brown folks talk about the cultural insensitivity they experience in the counseling session, we need to believe them. when they talk about the power imbalance and being ignored and being dismissed for their reactions or being seen as over emotional, right? And just the marginalization of sort of local practices. And it can come from somebody else who's also minoritized. So we have programs that really I don't know if this Hispanic man just didn't care or he didn't know. I mean, the ways in which we teach mental health may have led this Hispanic counselor to come to that conclusion. But where did that leave my cousin? So this is why when we say there's stigma around mental health, the stigma is real. In many, many cases, the stigma is real. I think it sort of goes without saying that we have whitewashed our workouts, right? I have never been taught yoga from a person in India, like never, right? It's just been commodified, and the wellness industry has been long criticized for appropriating these practices that often come from indigenous and people of color cultures, not just yoga, but meditation, herbalists, traditional medicines, excluding them while marketing their practices. And during the pandemic, this really became pronounced, and something really interesting happened. It was not just the vaccine ignorance that they spewed. And these wellness folks have lots and lots of followers and gained lots and lots of notoriety and financial gain during COVID-19, spewing these things that actually can kill people, right? But what was interesting is they really aligned themselves with far right ideology and even went on podcasts of other white supremacists. So I'm still trying to figure out what is the connection between wellness and these sort of far right ideologies that either have overtly coded language or not so overtly coded language. What is that all about? Maybe a great student in here could study something like that. Another value that is of the white culture that I think is impacting the wellness and mental health of us all is this whole thought that you are only responsible for yourself, right? Self-reliance and personal responsibility that also aligns with meritocracy and other sort of do-it-yourself, type ventures. And for me, it's like, well, I pay taxes. Shouldn't the government take some responsibility for me? Like, I have neighbors. Shouldn't we care for our neighbors? Isn't caring for our neighbors actually caring for ourselves? Why do we live in this self-care moment where we are sort of expected to do everything ourselves and not rely or have the benefit of that sort of collectivism? So I just really think that has really been misused, and I want to show you a couple of ways in which I think that is. Workplace burnout is serious. Like I'm looking at STEM workplaces, and the people are burnt out, right? Particularly with the mode now that it's an always on culture, like you never turn it off. And who's rewarded? The person that works 12-hour days are often rewarded, right? As if what could be the more reward except time off after working 12 hours a day. But so if someone says they're experiencing workplace burnout, it's often attributed to them as opposed to examining the labor practices, right? Or how, work exploits people. And it just frames these mental health struggles as sort of individual failures rather than as a result of systemic inequalities. And I think this has done a disservice because it places the burden on the individuals to fix themselves while the exploitive work culture and labor practices can remain the same. And we also find, from a student perspective, I've had many, many students tell me that when they experience racism in the classroom, the objective when they talk to someone more senior is to go seek counseling. So if I'm enduring racism in the classroom that is creating stress for me, why is it my job to fix myself? I mean, does that make any sense? Do I want to get used to the racism that's in the classroom? Is that the objective, right? Do I want to learn how to put up with it? Maybe another strategy would be, if you feel like you're having this experience, the faculty member maybe will look at his records for the last 3 years and see if there is a pattern of discriminating against other students of color. And maybe the intervention could be with a faculty member. Maybe the student shouldn't be intervened, right? The intervention is that she spoke up and said something, and now she has to fix herself. This is really, really bad, but this is what I see we're doing. We're using mental health as sort of a fix-all to even fix systemic issues that are beyond individuals' control. I also want to talk about suffering because there's been a lot of it. I see suffering on the streets, on the news. It's unescapable. But I'm here to argue that suffering is not preordained. Right? It's created by human actions and systems. Injustice, inequality, violence are human-made causes of suffering, right? Although the blueprint often feels the same, that we export what suffering should look like and what it shouldn't look like. And suffering is not random, right? So I hear when I do this with younger groups, they often talk about the history of Black and brown people suffering and how they just expect to endure something similar just by virtue of being Black and brown. And I think that's so sad. I really think that's sad that we have to continue to repeat the burdens and the trauma that we face historically over and over again. And often when suffering is standardized, it doesn't include what it means to be terrorized, displaced, devalued, undervalued, right? And what this does is creates a cycle of harm and healing where you have the systemic racism and violence that's enacted upon you. And then the solution is to sort of meditate yourself, out of that experience. Therefore, the pain is sort of pathologized, monetized, while the accountability is absent, right? And many participants talked about this is their term. They say that in some STEM environments, they are existing in a mental hell, right? I'm sure that this doesn't just apply to STEM, correct? And there's often a dichotomy, what they experience is often a dichotomy between depression and oppression, pain that's often caused externally, or stress or trauma, but the treatment is often internally. Take a pill, do that, do this, do your favorite yoga pose, etc., right? And there are many studies that now have shown that oppression creates depression. When you are starving, and you could suffer from severe mental illness, that the starvation could actually create or exacerbate the mental illness that you're experiencing. The colleagues did a meta review and found over and over again, study after study, that a lot of some of the mental health symptoms were directly related to the oppression, the systemic oppression that folks were going through, external factors. So food insecurity and social determinants can be risk factors for developing serious mental illness, right? And lastly, I want to say, some definitions of culture sort of reify the stereotype. And even within the Black culture, there's so much heterogeneity, but often when we talk about it in wide, sweeping ways. And I think it's because we are trying to match science that is predicated on these universal laws, which change and evolve. We're finally now admitting that, and things that can be demonstrated in a laboratory conditions. And I just don't think culture should be measured like that. It often leads to a misunderstanding, downplaying the uniqueness of mental health. It provides inadequate treatment and support. There are insignificant recognition for the complexity of mental health often due to, many, many reasons, but ideology and culture is one of those reasons. We have to start grappling with that. So just to end this particular section, I'm hoping that we as a school and as a society can work to decolonize mental health frameworks and to just directly address sort of these structural inequities and oppression as some of the reasons why mental health occurs in certain populations. So I'm down to my second one. So here's a lack of appreciation for indigenous spirituality. I want to tell you that I was not raised religious or spiritual at all, and I am late to the party on this one. I'm late because I'm a scientist and I'm analytical, and everything has a rational answer. And I had to get over myself. I had to get over the ways in which I taught and the ways in which I was taught, and there to understand there's something in the cosmos that cannot be ignored. But I saw a little glimpse of this. Anybody got a black grandma? Anybody? Spiritual as I don't know what can predict the future. Are y'all with me? Yes, I saw it in my black grandma. But there's two aspects of spirituality, and we spend an inordinate amount of time on the first aspect, which is sort of the religion and the practice and revering gods. I just want to say historically that hasn't worked well for Black and brown people, but that's another presentation for another day. But the second aspect is more sort of esoteric or hidden. It's an experience that, allows someone to go from the body to the mind to the soul to the spirit, sort of transitioning, transcending and including with greater depth and greater consciousness, and I believe actually more empathy, right? So I think spirituality creates a place where you can empathize with your neighbor, your loved one. And then the concept of health is rooted in the concept of wholeness. I mean, to be healthy is to be whole. And to be whole might mean to be holy. And that spiritual connotation to health, it could also be social, ecological, and cosmological dimensions as well. This is one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to Afrofuturism, because it allows me to dream of a world where my spirituality isn't hindered by the ways in which I've learned science. So what I'm doing is I'm decolonizing my own brain through Afrofuturism and other modes of thinking like that. So a couple of examples. The United Nations has finally recognized and acknowledged that indigenous ways of knowing and doing are the solution to climate change. And I'm so happy the acknowledgement came, but with the not recent, both historical and contemporary attacks against climate change, we still have a very long way to go. But I have looked traditionally, looking at spirituality and thinking about indigenous cultures who revered water, sun, wind, land, right? And that reverence helped them to protect those places and spaces. And that's just totally, it feels like it's been decimated, even though I know there's a lot of very intentional work happening there. What happens with the recognition of indigenous wellness is that you have these more embodied relationships that are associated with cultural ties and spiritual connections that can really help to provide, many solutions that may not fall under the guise of traditional mental health. My chair, Pamela Collins, brought a couple of weeks ago senior faculty member Professor Angela Orfi-Atta. I hope I said that right. And I was very, very intrigued by her presentation. She talked about in Ghana the significance of these oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Could you get that? The acknowledgement of these prayer camps and how they are different cultural ways of getting mental health care that need to incorporate the culture of the community that you're caring for. And I went down a rabbit hole after hearing her presentation, and I found out that Professor Orfi Atta spent several years as a deputy minister for manpower development and employment, where she was able to take her concepts in her culturally relevant way of carrying out mental health on a broader level. And it just made me wonder, to what extent do we need to get political to get some of these things done, or to have an expansive role in improving mental health? Okay, so I'm going to be a little vulnerable, and I'm going to say I was a wayward teenager. I know it's hard to believe because I got it so together right now, but I was 15. I lived on the south side of Chicago. I was doing everything my mom asked me not to do, but something happened. I had a 2.4 GPA. So for those of you all who may be struggling, it does get better. House music, so Chicago house music. I wish I had a 30-second clip. I just thought about it now. I'd love for y'all to jam out on some of the music that saved me. But I told my counselor, because I was so wayward, my mom sent me to a counselor. And I told my counselor that house music saved my life. Seriously? Okay. And she laughed in my face. She thought it was absolutely ridiculous. But for me, it became a lifeline. It unlocked the pain that I held within inside. It allowed my body to express things that my voice couldn't. You all get me. Anybody feel that way about music sometimes? Okay, okay. I got some believers in the room. And I surrendered to the rhythm. I surrendered to it, and I discovered a profound connection with my body and a deeper understanding of myself. House music did that. Not just the music, but the community surrounding the music. So I get to laugh in my old counselor's face, who told me that I was crazy, because there's a whole theory of music that is from South India. Carnatic music theory. I hope I said that right. And even though sort of the sounds and the expressions are different, the theme and having music express different emotions at different times. I mean, it just sort of exemplified the integration of the body, soul, mind, earth, world, universe, right? I was thinking existentially when I got out of a house music session, for example. So instead of reading this slide, I want to share a story. So my dad is Nigerian. And he says in his Nigerian community, they are mental health healers. That's what they call them. Some of them are college educated, and some of them are not. Believe this, they deliver babies. I mean, is that odd to you? A mental health counselor that deliver babies? They also serve as justices before you get to court. So like mediators. And they are responsible for caring for the mental health of those who cannot afford to care for, who cannot afford mental health services. So they're never rich, but they're widely revered in the community. And I just thought, wow, isn't that a way of sort of bringing the physical, the mental, the spiritual, the ecological, and the collective together? That, in my dad's community in Nigeria, they figured out how to do that, while we here are still struggling to do that. Finally, I want to talk about the C word, which is okay. So pray for me on this one, but we're gonna make it work. So these are all the wellness organizations that have risen up to sort of wellness stardom in the past few years. It's an explosion. It's $1 billion industry. But we know, so let me just first off by just stating the obvious, wellness isn't cheap. Things that used to be free, you now have to pay for. I am very well expecting, when I have a grandchild, to go to the monkey bars and see a pay for feature and the monkey bars and the swing sets, because they are monetizing everything, right? And what this does is it shuts often Black and brown kids out of doing certain activities because of the high price that you have to pay just to be healthy. But beyond that is that we have to understand a few things about capitalism, and I'm still learning about this, is that capitalism actually requires inequities. It cannot exist without inequities. So that's the backdrop from which I'm talking about capitalism. So capital can only be capital when it's accumulating, and the capitalist system accumulates by producing and moving through relations of severe inequality by groups. And it is a system that demands almost self destruction of certain bodies within the system. And that, so if you require self destruction, then the system is not worth preserving, right? But we continue to sort of exist in the system, and let Angela Davis say it better than me. This certainly can't be separated. Racism cannot be separated from capitalism, because racism is the mechanism for power and material gains. Let me give you just one brief example. We all know that ultra rich people do not pay taxes. This is a open secret. Everybody, do y'all know that? Okay, well, if you didn't know, do some research. Don't believe me. Do you know what is the most audited place in America in terms of IRS audit? A small town, a small, predominantly 99% Black town in Mississippi, where the average salary is $28,000. So we go all the way down to Mississippi and mess with poor Black people, and we let the ultra rich not pay taxes. That's racism and capitalism together. Let me share another example. So this angry Black woman stereotype, and in the words of hip hop philosopher Flavor Flav, we got a right to be angry, right? So listen, take your advice from wherever you can get it, you know? But what I'm trying to say here is that activists who are fighting against injustice are also pathologized. We do it here on campus, we surveil them, sometimes we read their emails, and worse, right? And that sort of pathologization keeps us from fighting against racial injustice. So people are afraid. They are afraid to stand up because they know there are repercussions from that. And then there's this term called excited delirium. So I don't know historically when this happened, but historically, 12 Black women were murdered, and they hired someone to determine how they were murdered. And the person came up with this term, excited delirium, and he said that they were on a mix of cocaine and some other drugs, and that created an excitability, an ultra excitability, and made them superhuman. That's the important part, that they had strength beyond measure, and that strength and that excitability killed them. Now, medical students thought that Black skin was tougher than white skin, right? So you see how historically this example reverberates, like, over and over again, where we have these activists being labeled as emotional or unstable or rioters, rather than addressing the systemic racism. We're not addressing what they're activating for or what they're fighting for. We focus on them and the individuals, and it further pathologize that experience, and reinforcing the idea that mental health issues are personal. They're not political. They're not structural in nature. Okay, I am really worried about our children, extremely, for many, many reasons. But here's one. So the ratio in California from school counselor to student is for about 500 to 1, where it should be 250 to 1, where it really should be like 50 to 1. Can we all agree? With the rise of mental health concerns. So they're trying to introduce chatbots to cushion that school counselor shortage. But do they not forget back in October 2024 that allegedly a chatbot pushed a teen to kill himself? We have to be careful. Not only do these AI chatbots go completely unregulated, having a chatbot as a counselor is likely to hinder real life social connections. If you now begin to depend on a machine instead of that human connection, what does that do to you? They could form very unhealthy attachments. And these chatbots should not replace like human empathy and nuanced guidance, in the moment guidance that one needs. I don't, okay, thank you. My last example, which I'm going to go through fairly quickly, is the manufactured war on drugs. And I'm just going to juxtapose that with the US prison system being the largest system of mental health, the largest system of mental health. So, what was happening? So, what was happening politically at this time, and I'm about to tie this to capitalism, is that the Black people and the hippies and Asians and white people were coming together. We were coming together on our shared humanity to fight our shared challenges that we had. And I believe, and studies have shown, that this was not good for capitalism. People come together and, have shared that sort of collective solidarity. That doesn't work for capitalism, because not only does capitalism require inequality, it requires for you to believe that the inequality is normal and correct. You all with me? Okay. So then you have this sort of coming of the minds of folks. So they created what? They created this Drug Enforcement Administration. Here you can see it don't work. Besides a little dip we had in 1983, whatever we did in 1983, they reversed it because the numbers are off the roof, and they're off the chain now in terms of overdose deaths. And then you see there's some numbers about incarceration, so there's a direct link there. And good old capitalism at work. Don't get arrested in New Jersey and Wisconsin, because you're 12 times more likely to get arrested there in relation to your white counterpart. And we have these billionaire companies that are making billions of dollars off of prison labor, while inmates are working at 0.23 pennies on the dollar. Walmart, Victoria's Secret, folks in the prison system are making your Victoria's Secret. So think about that next time you go to the pink store, right? And think about the ways in which being paid a low labor, being criminalized, can actually lead to increased mental health or even create mental health issues. We sort of live in the ivory tower, but I am very, very concerned about service workers. These are our, food service employees. These are our and folks who are making, $20 or less an hour. And a prime example of that is do you all remember when Southwest shuttered its flights a couple of years ago? I remember because I was at the airport, right? And I was so dismayed at the number of people screaming at the top of their lungs to these service counter workers who found out at the same time that the customers did that the flights were going to be shuttered. Of course, these decisions were made by leadership and folks higher up, but who was getting the brunt of the complaining? These folks were stressed. Do you know that a couple of people passed out? I'm talking about the workers as a result of their experiences, right? And so the next time, you go to McDonald's and, lady don't give you enough fries and you feel like you want to cuss her out or cuss him out or cuss they out, just remember they're in an exploitative working environment. They're probably getting underpaid. They cannot feed their families. They might be a little upset, but it is probably a result of labor practices, not them being bad people. So I do think that we need to look towards not just folks sort of in our environment, but the folks who serve us, right? So right here, I just want to say the system is not broken. It's designed to do exactly what it's doing. We need to sort of reject these exploitative systems. Um, Economic justice is mental health care. Remember, when you are poor and you can't eat or you don't have a place to sleep, you're at higher risk for mental health illnesses, so we need to change that. Challenge the prison industrial complex, sort of resist the commodification of wellness, and really look to the indigenous community. So, solutions require revolutions. I'm going to say that there's no quick fix. We just can't like do a few tweaks and et cetera, but we must replace the system. I say that while also being a pragmatist, also knowing that there are things that we have to do in the meantime. So, in the meantime, I think we need to understand that this may be like a really bold statement, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the entire mental health system, almost the entire system, works as an agent of trauma because of this lack of consciousness, the lack of realizing that all these things are together. And all of these things can impact one's mental health and one's sense of wellness. And I hate to like be the kumbaya lady, but I really think that we need to live. The insight of togetherness is crucial for our survival and for the survival of our planet. Right? I'm not good till Devin is good. Devin is not good till Zari is good. Zari's not good till Aisha is good, and on and on and on. We are together, right? And this whole thing about self-care, let me just say this real quick in my ending. This is what self-care has come to. Like you have, first of all, you got to get the cosmetic surgery because you got to look a certain way. And then you got to keep it up because you have this unrealistic body composition. I mean, come on. Then you have the high pressure to keep up with the Joneses with fashion. You know, you get $200 massage. I love me a massage, so I'm not tripping on that. But massages will not solve structural and institutional racism. You could go get a case of wine and go out and just basically tell people it's a fruit salad. Like back in the day when I turned 21, you could walk out with a case of wine. They call you a wino. But now you can just walk on out. You can walk in and get plastic surgery. I just really think that this is really damaging for one's mental health. This is not how we should be. This is not the answer to mental health. And again, why should we only be responsible for our own self-care? What is the responsibility of our community, of our neighborhood? So I would like to hear more about community care and less about self-care. And the biggest thing that we can do right now is advocate for universal health care. If we really want to fight the mental health crisis, that's the number one thing we can do, right? And I know I'm sort of out of time, so I'm going to just say another thing that I think we should research is white people and mental health. And there's a downside to privilege. There is a downside to thinking that the expectation is that you be on the top just by virtue of who you are, right? Not by virtue of what you do, but just by virtue of who you are. And I think that we could get some real understanding why we sort of cling to these false narratives of meritocracy, why we have this sort of passive complicity, but really it's systemic racism. But our ideology is about fairness and equality. I think we can't say equity anymore, but hopefully we can still say equality. So that's our ideology, but our practices are very sort of greedism practices. And you know, there's real fear about, you know, this whole thing called replacement theory, where white supremacists are scared that they're going to get replaced. Like these things we need to investigate from a mental health perspective. But most of the mental health sort of focus on those who are more marginalized. But I think there's a downside to privilege too in terms of their own mental health. And I just want to acknowledge there's already great work. There's already infrastructures here at Johns Hopkins. If you are part of one of these institutes, hand up. I just want to see you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. I've researched these institutes. I think they're doing a great job. And maybe we could try to incorporate some more of these things within these institutes. And finally, I just want to say, you know, I still dream in the future, and I still believe that there's a future that's absent of discrimination and racism. I actually like to start from the point of imagining what would life be like if there was no racism and discrimination and work backwards, right? As opposed to starting from where I am and trying to work for a free place. I dream of that free place in my mind, and hopefully you'll come with me. I am not an island. I have a team of amazing folks. If you all could just please quickly stand up and show yourselves, and let's just give them a hand. they have all listened to too many versions of a bad presentation and helped me get it to a good presentation. So I thank them. We also have a lot of free resources in these handles, so please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Has a question? We have Mike standing by. Or is there, if anybody, has anybody, those of you online can put a question in the Q&A. Is that correct, Lataska? Well, let me ask you, could you talk a little bit about our rights? You didn't mention that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Our Rights is our organization. It stands for Racial Revolutionary and Inclusive Guidance for Health Throughout STEM. And the reason why we focused on, so we want to be revolutionary because we don't want to assume that quick fixes can fix structural, deep-seated, hundreds of year old problems, right? So we need a new way of thinking and not a revolution like bang, 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 even though I'm down with Malcolm X and all of that, but sort of a revolution of our ideology, a reshifting of our culture, a rethinking of the ways in which we can promote STEM in ways that don't kill the planet. I mean, if you really want to blame someone for climate change, the STEMers are to blame. The type of technology and innovation that they produce without thinking about the consequences and being able to get away without thinking about the consequences. And now we have legal precedents for them to further not think about the consequences is one of the reasons why it's an earthquake in Myanmar. I bet, I don't know, it's just a thought that we're going to find a connection between some STEM technology or overproduction or that emissions and what happened. Because 92% of the emissions, the harmful emissions, come from the global north, and only 8% come from the global south. But the effects on the global south are disproportionately large. So when we say health, we're talking about that sense of wholeness. It's not just enough for you to be successful in traditional ways. High GPA, good job, coveted internship, letters from maybe the university president. If you have Bell's palsy and a side of your face is paralyzed because you're stressed out and you're in the hospital and your advisor tells you, well, you can finish up this assignment because after all, you're just laying down in the hospital, we consider that not healthy, right? So we ask questions in our surveys like, are you well? You know, how do you define wellness? What brings you, what places and spaces can you go to that celebrate you, not just tolerate you? So that is why we have a health component in, and that's why I'm so happy to be in the School of Public Health.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I come from Canada, and we have a universal healthcare there,
Yes.
but we seem to have the same problems. We seem to have the same, we'll say, problems with drugs, with overuse, and we have a different system of racism, usually with indigenous peoples and less with black people, because we have different history of like slavery there. And I'm trying to reconcile all what you talk and how some of those systems, even though in Canada it's a different problem, but they still exist. And how do we solve it? How do I put these two things together, and how can we work towards a better life, a better community?
Yeah, I'm hesitant to answer how do we solve all the problems of Western countries. I think if I had the answer to that, I'd probably be like sipping a Mai Tai in the Bahamas somewhere. But I do believe that, and I didn't mention Canada, and I'm not saying that universal health care will solve all of our problems because it certainly won't. But I think it's a step in the right direction. And I do know that many American companies are outsourcing to Canada, particularly because they don't have to pay the high insurance premiums, right? So it makes financial good sense. And the reason why I mention that is financial good sense seems to be one of the things that the powers that be pay attention to, right? So I think we can make a strong financial case for universal health care so we can employ within the country and not without of the country. But certainly just the implementation of universal health care won't solve racism, won't solve all of those problems. We have to continue to do the revolutionary work to make that happen.
Yeah, Donna, we'll get.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is, where would you draw the line between cultural exchange and cultural appropriation for wellness trends?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to grapple with that one. I can't come up with an answer on the spot. I do think it's an excellent question to ask and to grapple with because, to the extent that, like, let's just take yoga as a practice. South Indians haven't made a lot of um, they haven't made anything off of that, even though it's being carried around the world now. But the people who are really making the money off of that still tend to be, our white culture. So the extent that maybe they could, oh gosh, now I'm getting back into capitalism. Yeah, I don't have a great answer, but I like questions like that. I like questions that make me think. Maybe could I get your information at the end and I will grapple with it together. How about? Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk, and
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, like, how can you effectively communicate these ideas about, like, mental health, and also how systemic racism has like so many outlets and ways to affect people to like maybe populations that aren't as perceptive to these ideas? Because I know that like mental health is a very stigmatized subject, and also talking about like these very broad like systems that affect all of us here. It's not a very easy thing to communicate, so I'm just wondering if you have any strategies for that.
Yeah, that question I can answer. Thank you. So I'm typically talking to a group of white engineers, so I know how to do this. One of the things that I've been studying is the Othering Institute, and I forget. I'm forgetting the name of the person who designed the institute, but he's a black man. And what he did is he founded this institute where he brings conservatives together with people who are less conservative, I guess maybe liberals, and those on the left on shared commonality. So they're not like hanging out together, going to concerts together, but on this one particular issue that they agree with, they can come together in the spirit of that issue. So I've been trying to study strategies like that. And what engineers care about is innovation. They care about innovation and invention. And if I tie having people that didn't come from your same background, that didn't go to your same school, that doesn't have your same experience, can really lead to a more innovative lab, a more effective lab, and maybe, get you some more awards or accolades or salary or whatever it is they care about. I find that it's much more receptive than saying, DEI is a necessary component of any innovation, which it is, but I don't say it like that, right? So I sort of package it in a certain way, but there are certain things that I won't do. Like I won't package it in a way that hurts my soul, right? Because I still have to go to sleep at night. So I try to do this sort of balance between finding the shared commonality, like what's the hook for them, what do they care about, and linking it to something that folks like me also care about too. So that's just one single issue. So it's a lot of hard work. What I found through the years is telling people that DEI will actually give you a better lab and more salary and et cetera. They don't care. They don't care. So I can't say those words. I do have to say different words, but I still try to stay true to the game.
Yes.
Dr. McGee, thank you. It's so cool you're in person. My PhD is in education, and so like my professors in graduate school and PhD school, we it, just all revere you. So thank you for being here. It's an honor. It's truly I like an honor to see you in person. I love like the topic of like your talk, a whitewashing wellness. So I study how school policing and school discipline impacts the mental health of Black youth. And an issue that I run across, I'm sure like a lot of us do, is our surveys, our measures. I hate this term, so forgive me. We validate like, the measures on like diverse people, whatever that means, right? Yet these measures, like in the case of my work, are not pro-Black. They don't capture the experiences of Black children. Yet, between someone like me who's like is racialized as white and someone like who's racialized as Black, there's a common humanity nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you speak to, like in terms of decolonizing our measures, like to be pro-Black? Because like for instance, like the way Black boys experience like depressive symptoms is much different than white boys, and Black girls and white girls and so on. Could you speak to like that discrepancy in our work? Yeah, how can we go about finding those differences, yet common humanities as well?
Sure. So thank you so much for your compliment. I'm really honored. I run an institute on critical quantitative skill sets and ideologies. And one of the things that is said over and over at the institute is that we just don't have good measures for folks of color, for students of color, for people of color, period. But the amount of money and time it would take to create those measures is vast, and no one has been willing to do the hard longitudinal work of creating those measures. Additionally, measures that and scales that are created by Black researchers are less likely to be used even on research for Black people. Right? So one of the things that I'm thinking that the team that we may engage in, particularly with the Institute, is listing all the wonderful measures that have been created from Black scholars for research on Black youth and adults, and using those measures in the meantime until we get like a big major survey that, the others seem to get much more frequently than us. So yeah, it's a huge problem. Correct.
Well, let me thank you again, Professor McGee. It's so incredibly wonderful to have you here at the university and in our own School of Public Health. And we look forward to many years of collaboration with you. So thank you so much. And thank you for all that you're doing and what you're contributing to the field. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, audience, for such engaging and wonderful questions. Thank you.